The nurse stayed after her shift, not knowing a camera was rolling. She was supposed to be home an hour ago, but something made her stay just a little longer. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. Maria had already clocked out. Her bag was slung over one shoulder, her keys were in hand, and she was halfway down the corridor of St. Luke's Hospital. It had been a hard shift, the kind that presses on your shoulders even after you've changed out of scrubs. 12 hours on her feet, 3 back-to-back admissions, and a patient code just 2 hours before her shift ended. Every nurse on her floor had left or was heading toward the elevators, and her mind was already drifting to leftovers waiting in her fridge and the feel of her soft bed. But then she heard it, a sound she couldn't ignore. It was faint, coming from one of the pediatric rooms tucked near the end of the hallway. A small, choked sob, barely loud enough to notice if you weren't paying attention. Most people wouldn't have heard it. Most people wouldn't have stopped. But Maria stopped. She looked down the hall and then at the elevator doors in front of her. Her hand hovered over the elevator button, but she didn't press it. Instead, she turned around. Room 203. The door was cracked open, just enough for the soft hospital light to spill into the hallway. Maria gently pushed it open and peeked inside. A little boy sat upright in the hospital bed, maybe 5 or 6 years old, clutching a stuffed dog with one arm while using the other to wipe tears from his eyes. His hospital gown was too big for him, and the IV stand beside his bed seemed almost taller than he was. She stepped in quietly. "Hey there," she said, keeping her voice low and gentle. "Couldn't sleep?" The boy shook his head and sniffled. Maria scanned the room. No parents, no nurse in sight. A quick glance at the whiteboard on the wall told her the basics. His name was Liam. He had been admitted just a few hours earlier, and his assigned nurse had likely already ended her shift too. There was a note scribbled hastily at the bottom of the board. Parents en route. Delayed. Maria could have just walked away. She wasn't on the clock anymore. She wasn't even assigned to pediatrics that day. Her shift had ended, and she wasn't being paid for any extra time. But something about the way Liam clutched that stuffed dog, something about how alone he looked, it anchored her in place. She moved to the side of the bed and pulled up the visitor chair. "Mind if I sit with you for a little bit?" Liam nodded, just barely. He didn't say a word, but he didn't stop her either. Maria pulled out her phone and turned the brightness down low. "Do you like cartoons?" she asked. He hesitated, then gave a small nod. She opened a streaming app and found a familiar animated series. Colorful animals, soft music, silly voices. Something safe, something simple. She handed him the phone and watched as he held it carefully, eyes still watery, but now locked on the screen. For the next few minutes, neither of them said anything. Maria just sat with him, glancing at the clock only once. She knew every minute she stayed was another minute away from rest, but it didn't matter right now. This mattered more. At one point, Liam leaned ever so slightly toward her. His shoulder touched hers, and he didn't pull away. She smiled to herself. In the hallway just outside the room, a security camera, recently installed as part of the hospital's updated monitoring system, picked up her every movement. She didn't know it was there. Didn't know anyone would see this moment. To Maria, it wasn't about being seen. It was just a boy who needed someone to sit beside him until the fear passed, and a nurse who couldn't leave while he was still scared. Liam didn't say much at first. Just small nods, the occasional glance at the door, and that quiet grip on his stuffed dog like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Maria stayed beside him, phone in his lap playing cartoons, the volume low enough not to echo through the quiet room. Outside, the hospital's evening rhythm had slowed. Nurses had handed off shifts, lights in the admin wing dimmed, and even the vending machines seemed quieter. But in room 203, time held still. Maria leaned back slightly in the chair, stretching her sore feet beneath her. She wasn't sure how long she'd been sitting there. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket, a reminder about a grocery pickup she'd definitely be missing. Liam looked up. "Are my mom and dad coming?" It was the first full sentence he'd spoken. Maria turned toward him and softened her expression. "They are. They just got stuck in traffic, but they're on their way." He didn't answer, just turned back to the screen, but his little shoulders relaxed a bit, like hearing it out loud helped more than reading it on a dry erase board ever could. Maria glanced again at the chart clipped to the end of the bed. Liam had been admitted earlier that evening with abdominal pain and a mild fever. Nothing serious, but enough that the doctors wanted to monitor him overnight. The parents had been with him initially, but had stepped out to grab a few things from home when they were told he'd be kept overnight. Then, traffic. It happened more often than people realized. And usually, someone from the night staff would check in, sit for a bit, try to comfort the younger patients until family arrived. But it was a chaotic night, and Maria suspected Liam had been unintentionally left off that informal rotation. She adjusted the blanket over his legs, just to give her hands something to do. "Do you like dinosaurs?" she asked. He looked at her sideways, the tiniest spark of interest flickering in his eyes. "Triceratops is my favorite." "Good choice," she smiled. "Strong, but peaceful." He nodded again, this time a little faster. Maria leaned in. "You want to see something cool?" He perked up a little. She scrolled through her phone and pulled up a photo. Her niece's Triceratops-themed birthday cake from 2 months ago. Green frosting, big plastic horns, the whole thing. She showed it to him, and to her surprise, he giggled. "That's silly," he said. "It really was," she agreed. "It melted halfway through the party. Looked like the dinosaur was crying." He laughed again. A real laugh this time, not forced. The room seemed warmer instantly. For a while, that's all they did. Talked about dinosaurs, watched cartoons, and slowly chipped away at the space between them. Maria didn't press him with questions, didn't try to make him brave. She just stayed, and in that staying, gave him something he hadn't had since his parents left. Comfort. From the hallway, the soft whir of the security camera was constant but unnoticed. It watched the scene in silence, capturing nothing dramatic. No emergencies, no grand gestures. Just a tired nurse in a visitor chair and a scared little boy starting to feel safe again. At one point, Liam rested his head against her arm. "I'm not scared anymore," he mumbled, eyes half closed. "I'm glad," she whispered back. She didn't tell him that she needed to go soon, that she was already well over her hours. She just let him rest, the weight of his trust settling onto her arm like a blanket. This wasn't about protocols or checklists anymore. This was something else, something quieter. Sometimes healing didn't come from medicine or machines. Sometimes it came from sitting beside someone who needed you, even when no one asked you to. Maria stayed right there, the room dim and quiet, while the night gently carried on without her. The clock on the wall ticked past 8 p.m. Maria knew it. She felt it in her legs, in the tightness behind her eyes, and in the hollow reminder from her stomach that she hadn't eaten since lunch. But she didn't move. Liam had dozed off, still clutching his stuffed dog, his head tilted slightly toward her arm. The cartoon had long since ended, the screen gone dark. The room was quiet now, just the soft hum of medical equipment and the occasional beep from a monitor. Maria sat still, careful not to shift too much. Her phone was on silent, screen down on her lap. A few missed messages were waiting for her, a group text from coworkers already making plans for their day off, and one from her sister asking if she'd made it home yet. She hadn't responded. She didn't want to. Because right now, home felt like this small chair in room 203, with a 5-year-old boy asleep beside her and no one else around. She looked at him, really looked at him. His breathing had evened out, and there was no more tension in his face. Earlier, he'd looked afraid to blink, like closing his eyes might make the room even emptier. But now, he looked peaceful, safe. She wondered what he'd been through that day. Probably a sudden trip to the ER, bright lights, cold rooms, strange faces in masks. That kind of day was hard for any kid, but especially hard when your parents weren't there when night finally fell. Maria sighed softly and reached to adjust the edge of his blanket. She hadn't planned this. She didn't come into work thinking she'd be staying late for a child she'd never met. Nurses rarely get to plan their day anyway. But this part, this moment, wasn't written in any chart. It wasn't assigned or scheduled or expected. And still, here she was. Out in the hallway, the cleaning crew was starting their rounds. The faint squeak of a mop echoed off the tile floors. Lights in most of the patient rooms were dimmed or off entirely. The night shift had settled in, but Maria wasn't part of that shift anymore. Technically, she was just a visitor now. Her back ached from the chair, the kind of ache that lingered after long days. But she didn't stand. She didn't try to ease the discomfort. She stayed where she was, even as her body reminded her that she was long overdue for rest. Because she knew something. Sometimes, presence was the best form of care. And Liam, even in sleep, seemed to know that too. A soft knock came at the doorframe. Maria turned her head. A younger nurse, probably fresh out of orientation, peeked inside. "Oh, sorry," the nurse whispered. "Didn't know anyone was in here." Maria smiled. "It's okay. He fell asleep." The nurse looked at the scene, and her expression shifted. A little surprise, a little admiration. "I saw his parents are on their way," she said, "but I think they're still stuck on I-40. Pretty bad wreck near the on-ramp." Maria nodded. "Yeah, poor kid was alone when I walked by." The younger nurse hesitated. "You want me to sit with him for a bit?" Maria glanced down at Liam. He stirred slightly, brow furrowing. She shook her head. "No, he's okay. He's settled now. I'll stay until they get here." The other nurse gave a quiet smile. "All right. I'll be around if you need anything." And then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Maria looked back at Liam. His breathing was still steady. He hadn't woken up. She rested her head lightly against the wall behind her, letting her eyes close for just a second. Maybe it was strange, staying behind like this. Maybe it wasn't what she was supposed to do. But it felt right. Not because it was expected, not because someone would notice, but because sometimes the most important part of the job wasn't what happened during your shift. It was what you were willing to do after it. And Maria was willing to stay. Maria didn't know there was a camera watching. Not in a suspicious way, not in a Big Brother kind of way, just a simple hallway camera, recently installed as part of the hospital's quiet effort to upgrade its security system. Motion-triggered, mounted near the ceiling, and barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. But it had a clear view of room 203. It couldn't see inside, not directly. Patient privacy rules made sure of that. But it could see the open door, could see Maria walk in after her shift, and, most importantly, it could see that she hadn't left. The footage showed her walking into the room nearly an hour earlier, already out of uniform, her badge still clipped to her belt, but her work technically finished. It showed her standing in the doorway for a few seconds, hesitating, and then stepping in. From that point forward, she never came back out. Inside the room, Liam stirred in his sleep again. This time, he mumbled something incoherent and shifted positions, his head now resting against Maria's upper arm. She looked down, her face soft, and adjusted the blanket over him without saying a word. She hadn't touched her phone in a while. She wasn't scrolling or texting or checking the time. She was just there. The hallway outside remained quiet. Across the hospital, in a small control room near the back offices, 2 security staff were seated in front of a wall of screens. Most of them were on automatic cycle, 10 seconds per feed, rotating through dozens of hallways and exits. One of the techs, a woman named Janice, had been working there for over a decade. She was sipping coffee when the screen flipped to the pediatric wing and caught the open door of room 203. "Pause that," she said. Her co-worker, Devon, reached for the keyboard and froze the frame. The screen showed Maria in the visitor chair, back slightly hunched, a child leaning against her. "Is she on duty?" he asked. Janice squinted. "Don't think so. I know her. Maria. She's ICU most days. That's pediatrics." They let the footage roll for a few more seconds. No movement, just a nurse sitting with a patient. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. But Janice kept watching. Because in a building where people come and go by the hour, where urgency is constant and movement never stops, stillness stands out. Back in room 203, Maria shifted gently in her seat. Her shoulder had gone a little numb from holding the same position too long, but she didn't want to disturb Liam. He was still sleeping, lips parted, fingers twitching slightly like he was dreaming. The longer she sat, the more disconnected she felt from the hospital's routine. The rhythm of call lights and codes and huddles and rounds. All of that had faded the moment she chose to stay. And outside the room, the camera kept recording. It recorded the janitor walking past, glancing in and offering Maria a nod before continuing down the hallway. It recorded the night nurse checking a supply cart across the way. It recorded the elevator doors opening and closing with no one inside. And still, Maria remained. Inside that small square room, time had slowed down to match the pace of a child finally feeling safe. In the control room, Janice hit a few keys and flagged the clip. Not for any disciplinary reason, not because something was wrong, but because every once in a while, something showed up on the feed that reminded them why the hospital was more than machines and paperwork. She saved the footage under a simple tag, Room 203, Unscheduled Stay. She didn't say anything to Maria about it, didn't even mention it to anyone else at first. She just let it sit in the archives. Because sometimes the most meaningful moments weren't the ones with alarms or action. Sometimes they were the ones where someone stayed behind when they didn't have to, when no one was watching and no one was asking. Except someone was watching, and they were about to make sure the world saw what compassion really looks like. The knock at the door came just after 9:00 p.m. It was quiet at first, hesitant, like the person on the other side wasn't sure they should even be knocking. Maria looked up slowly. She was still in the same chair, her back stiff now, legs tingling from lack of movement. Liam was still asleep against her arm, his breathing soft and even. The knock came again, a little firmer this time. Maria gently shifted, careful not to wake him. She eased his head onto the pillow, tucking the stuffed dog close to his chest. He stirred for a second, but didn't wake. She stood, stretching slightly as she walked to the door. Standing in the hallway were 2 people, mid-30s, out of breath, eyes red from stress. The man had one hand on his chest like he'd just sprinted down the hallway. The woman clutched her purse with both hands, as if letting go might make everything worse. "We're Liam's parents," the woman said quickly. We just got here. There was an accident on the highway. We tried calling. Maria nodded once and stepped aside. He's okay, she said softly. He's been sleeping. He was a little scared earlier, but he's settled now. The woman's shoulders dropped with relief. She stepped into the room first, rushing to the bed and brushing Liam's hair back from his forehead. The man followed behind, his eyes lingering on Maria for a moment. You stayed with him? He asked. She nodded again. He was by himself. I didn't want him to feel alone. The man swallowed hard and looked at his son, now safe, now sleeping. His voice cracked. Thank you. Maria didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't good with being thanked for something that felt basic, human, necessary. So she just offered a small smile and stepped back. The mother turned to her, her eyes wet now. He gets anxious in new places. I was so worried he'd panic once he realized we weren't here. He was scared at first, Maria said. But we talked about dinosaurs. He showed me his favorite cartoon. He did okay. The woman laughed, wiped at her face, and looked at her son again. He loves dinosaurs. Maria glanced at the clock above the door. She hadn't meant to stay this long. 2 hours, maybe more, since her shift ended. Her feet ached. Her shoulders were tense. But looking at Liam now, seeing his parents safe beside him, it felt right to have stayed until now. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. He'll probably sleep through the night, Maria said gently, starting to back toward the door. If you need anything, the night nurse is just 2 doors down. The mother turned back to her. You're not his nurse tonight, are you? Maria shook her head. No, I'm ICU. I was just on my way out when I heard him crying. The man stared at her again. Longer this time. Like he wanted to say something bigger than thank you, but didn't know how. He just nodded, eyes full. Maria gave a last glance at Liam, then slipped out of the room, letting the door close quietly behind her. The hallway was empty again. She walked slowly this time, her body heavier than before, but lighter in a way that didn't quite make sense. At the elevator, she paused to rub her lower back. She finally picked up her phone and read the messages she'd been ignoring for the last hour. Nothing urgent, just reminders that the rest of the world had kept moving while she'd been in that room. She stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a soft chime. Back in room 203, the camera was still recording. It caught the parents sitting on either side of Liam's bed. It caught the mother leaning in to kiss her son's forehead. It caught the father, silent, wiping his eyes when he thought no one could see. Maria didn't know any of that. She was already outside, crossing the parking lot, her car keys finally in her hand. She didn't expect anyone to remember what she did. She hadn't done it to be seen, but someone had seen. And soon, the world would too. The hospital parking lot was mostly empty by the time Maria reached her car. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across rows of vehicles that hadn't moved in hours. Her car sat near the far end, just where she'd left it early that morning, back when her biggest concern had been whether the break room coffee would be fresh. She slid into the driver's seat and exhaled, letting the silence settle around her. The door shut with a soft thud, and for the first time in hours, there were no machines beeping, no intercoms buzzing, no soft cries coming from a nearby room. It was just her. The engine turned over with a low rumble. She didn't pull out right away. Her phone buzzed again in the cup holder, the screen lighting up with a new message. From Sophia, sister. Hey, are you okay? You said you'd be home by 7. Maria stared at the screen. It was nearly 9:30. She typed a quick reply. Got held up. I'm fine. Headed home now. She didn't explain. Not because she didn't want to, but because she wasn't sure how. What do you even say? I stayed behind to sit with a scared little boy until his parents showed up? It sounded simple. Too simple for how it felt. She pulled out of the lot slowly, the tires crunching over loose gravel near the exit. The roads were dark and mostly empty, just the occasional car passing in the opposite direction. Streetlights blinked by every few seconds, carving her drive into quiet slices of stillness. Her apartment was only 20 minutes away, but tonight the distance felt longer. When she finally reached her building, she didn't go inside right away. Instead, she sat in the car, staring out the windshield at the rows of quiet windows. Her body ached in all the usual places: feet, lower back, neck. But there was something else too. A stillness inside her that she couldn't quite name. It wasn't pride. It wasn't exhaustion either. It was something gentler than both. The kind of feeling that came not from doing something extraordinary, but from doing something quietly good, when no one asked and no one expected it. Eventually, she grabbed her bag and headed upstairs. Her apartment was dim, just the light above the stove glowing faintly. She kicked off her shoes, dropped her keys into the dish by the door, and went straight to the fridge. She pulled out the leftovers she'd been thinking about earlier, cold pasta, nothing fancy, and set it on the counter. But then she stopped. She leaned both hands on the counter and looked down for a long moment. And then, without touching the food, she turned and walked to the bathroom. A shower first. That's what she needed. Steam filled the small space within minutes. She stood under the water, letting it wash away the day, the stress, the silence, and the weight of staying later than she had to. She thought about Liam, the way he'd finally fallen asleep, the way he leaned into her like he knew she wasn't going to leave. She thought about his parents, the look in their eyes, the way they didn't really know how to thank her, and how she didn't really need them to. When she finally crawled into bed, the room was completely dark. The only sound was the hum of the ceiling fan. She checked her phone one last time before setting it on the nightstand. Still no calls from work, no follow-ups. No one had asked her to explain why she'd stayed, because no one had noticed. Not yet. She stared at the ceiling, eyes heavy. She didn't know that somewhere, deep in the hospital's security system, a clip of her sitting in room 203 had already been saved. She didn't know that a pair of quiet observers had flagged it not for violation, but for something else entirely. She didn't know that tomorrow someone would hit play on a short, silent video and see more than just a nurse staying late. They would see something different, something human. Maria closed her eyes and finally let sleep take her. As far as she knew, it had been just another day. But it wasn't. The next morning started like any other inside the security office at St. Luke's Hospital. Janice sat with a coffee cup that had already gone cold, her reading glasses perched low on her nose as she scrolled through footage from the pediatric wing. The system had flagged a few motion events during the overnight hours, mostly staff walking through, a maintenance cart rolling by, and a confused patient wandering too far from his room. But then there was the clip she had saved the night before. Room 203, unscheduled stay. She clicked it again, just to watch. There was no audio. There never was. Just the soft, flickering images from the camera stationed at the end of the hallway. The view was partial. Just the doorway of room 203 and the sliver of light coming from inside. But that was all it needed. It showed Maria, walking up after hours, still in her hospital badge and street clothes. It showed her pausing outside the room, listening, then entering slowly, cautiously. That was at 7:18 p.m. She never came out again, until after 9. Janice leaned back in her chair, studying the screen. There was no dramatic moment, No urgency or crisis. Just a nurse pulling up a chair, sitting with a patient, and waiting. No chart in hand, no clipboard, no visible reason to be there. But she stayed. Devin walked in carrying a breakfast sandwich and glanced at the screen. "You're still watching that clip?" Janice didn't take her eyes off the monitor. "It's different." He took a bite and leaned over her shoulder. "That's Maria, right? ICU?" "Yeah," Janice said, "but that's pediatrics. Kid was alone for hours. Parents stuck in traffic. No nurse assigned. She just stayed." Devin watched in silence. The clip played on, showing a janitor walk by, then later, the parents arriving. Maria stepped out of the room just after that, gave them a nod, and walked down the hall toward the elevators. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked. Janice nodded slowly. "Yeah." Technically, they weren't supposed to share clips like this, not without running it by administration first. But there was a quiet understanding among longtime hospital staff. Every now and then, something worth sharing came through the feed. Not for discipline, not for legal reasons, just because it reminded people that this place wasn't all cold walls and fluorescent lights. Janice clipped the footage to a shorter segment, just under 2 minutes. It started with Maria entering the room and ended as she walked away. It was subtle. Almost nothing happened, but that was the point. She added a caption: "Compassion doesn't punch out." Then she opened the hospital's internal messaging board, found the login credentials for the official PR account, and uploaded the video. She didn't add anything else. No dramatic music, no slow fade-in quotes, just the raw clip and that one line. She clicked post. It was up within seconds. Staff could view it, like it, or share it. Some of the posts on the page had gotten a few comments before, mostly birthday shout-outs, retirements, fundraiser reminders, but nothing ever really went beyond the hospital walls. Until now. By noon, the clip had already been shared over 100 times. Nurses were commenting. Doctors, volunteers, even patients who had been treated at St. Luke's months ago. One comment read, "I remember her. She sat with my dad for an hour after his stroke. Didn't have to. Just did." Another, "This is what nursing really is. No spotlight, just showing up." By late afternoon, someone outside the hospital had reposted it on a healthcare blog. Then it found its way to a nursing forum. And from there, it started to move faster. Maria didn't know any of this. Her phone buzzed in her locker between shifts, but she hadn't checked it. She was already back at work, charting a patient who had coded just after breakfast. She hadn't seen the video. She hadn't read the caption. She didn't know that 2 minutes of quiet kindness had left the building and started to spread. All she knew was that her shift had started, and there were people who still needed her. By the time Maria stepped outside that evening, the sky was already fading to a deep blue. She didn't notice anything different, not in the way people looked at her, not in how her shift ended. Everything felt normal. Same paperwork, same exhaustion, same quiet walk to the parking lot. Her phone had buzzed a few times throughout the day, but she hadn't checked it. There just hadn't been time. Between rounds, discharges, and a patient who needed constant monitoring, the day had moved fast. She didn't know the video had gone viral. Not yet. It wasn't until she sat down in her car, the engine humming and her hands finally still, that she pulled out her phone. There were over a dozen unread messages. Texts, group chats, even a couple of emails flagged high importance. She furrowed her brow and started scrolling. Her sister was the first. Sophia. "Maria, did you see what the hospital posted? You're in it. That video is everywhere. It's on Facebook. Someone just posted it on Twitter too." Then her coworker Jason. "Is that you in the hallway with the kid? My mom just sent me that clip from a news page in Ohio, and another message from a former patient's daughter. I recognized you right away. You sat with my mom when she couldn't speak. Thank you for being the kind of nurse who never stops caring. Maria blinked at the screen, stunned. She opened the hospital's social media page, thumb hovering over the most recent post. There it was. The video was simple. Just her walking into room 203 and sitting beside Liam. The caption above it read, "Compassion doesn't punch out." No name, no details, just a silent moment, shared for the world to see. The view count was already climbing past 3 million. She watched the video, even though she had lived every second of it. Watching it now, from the outside, felt strange. Surreal, even. It wasn't that anything dramatic happened. It wasn't a rescue or a life or death moment. It was just her staying. Just her sitting beside a boy who didn't want to be alone. She scrolled through the comments. There were thousands. This is the kind of world I want to live in. No lights, no cameras, just heart. We need more people like this, especially in healthcare. Maria put a hand to her mouth, not to hold back tears, but just to steady herself. She hadn't expected this, hadn't asked for it. She thought back to that night. Liam had been so small in that bed, so quiet. She hadn't stayed for recognition. She stayed because it was what felt right. She didn't think anyone would notice, certainly not the world. But now here it was. The moment had been seen, and it was resonating far beyond the walls of room 203. She opened one of the emails, a message forwarded from the hospital's media coordinator. Subject, media request, CNN health segment. Body. We've received a few inquiries about the clip shared yesterday. A producer from CNN would like to speak with the nurse in the video. Only if she's comfortable, of course. Let us know how you'd like to proceed. Maria stared at it for a long moment, then closed her phone and rested her head against the back of her seat. She wasn't sure what to do. She didn't want to be a headline. She wasn't built for attention. She didn't do anything extraordinary. She just stayed in a room with a scared little boy. That's it. And yet, somehow that was enough. Across the country, people were watching the clip and seeing something they recognized, but rarely stopped to name. Kindness that expects nothing in return. Maria took a deep breath. Then another. She still didn't know what came next. Whether she'd agree to interviews or step back and let the moment speak for itself. But for now, she turned off her engine and sat in the silence for a few more minutes. The world had seen her. And in doing so, they were reminded of something they didn't even know they were missing. It started with a single message. Maria saw it the next morning, just as she was lacing up her shoes before heading out for another shift. It came from someone she didn't know. No profile picture, no mutual contacts, just a name and a few quiet words. You reminded me that kindness still exists. Thank you. That was it. No fanfare. No long story. Just a line that somehow hit harder than all the likes, shares, and media requests combined. She stared at it for a while, not knowing how to respond. Eventually, she just whispered to herself, "You're welcome," and slid her phone into her bag. By then, the video had passed 10 million views. The hospital's social media inbox was overflowing. News outlets kept reaching out. A few reporters showed up in the lobby, asking to speak with the nurse in the video. They never got to. Maria had already told the PR team she didn't want any interviews. She didn't need her face on a screen. She just wanted to do her job. Word had spread inside the hospital, too. Fellow nurses smiled at her a little longer in the break room. Some gave her quiet nods in the hallway. Doctors she barely knew began to address her by name. Even the head of the hospital made a point to shake her hand one morning, thanking her for representing the values of the institution. But the only thing that truly mattered to Maria was that Liam was okay. She stopped by pediatrics that same week, hoping to catch his family before discharge. Room 203 had a new name on the board, and Liam's chart was already filed away. "His parents left a note for you," one of the pediatric nurses said, handing Maria a small envelope. Inside was a hand-drawn picture, stick figures of Maria, Liam, and a dog that looked vaguely like a dinosaur. At the bottom, in shaky kid handwriting, "Thank you for not leaving me." Maria didn't cry, but she folded the picture slowly and tucked it into her badge wallet. It stayed there from that day on, behind her ID and CPR card, a quiet reminder of a quiet night. The messages kept coming, from nurses across the country, from parents, from strangers. One read, "I watched your video and decided to go visit my dad in the nursing home. First time in 2 years. I just didn't want him to feel alone anymore." Another, "You helped me remember why I went into nursing in the first place. I'd forgotten." Maria read every message. She didn't respond to most of them. There were too many. But she carried them with her in the same way she carried that folded drawing, quietly, respectfully, without needing to say anything back. Weeks passed. The world moved on, as it always does. A new viral story would come next, and then another after that. But Maria's life didn't change in any major way. She still worked 12-hour shifts. She still skipped lunch sometimes. She still walked past room 203 on her way to the ICU and remembered how small Liam looked in that bed. The difference wasn't in what she did. It was in what people saw. They saw that compassion isn't loud. It doesn't need lights or cameras. It's not a performance. It's a decision, often made in silence, when no one's watching, and no reward is expected. Maria never meant to become a symbol. She didn't want recognition. All she did was stay in a room with a child who needed someone to be there. But maybe, she thought, that's the kind of story the world needed. Not something heroic, not something polished, just something real. And that, more than anything, is what people saw in her. Not a nurse who wanted to be noticed, just a person who didn't leave. And that made all the difference. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.